Roman Reigns just committed the most shocking act of betrayal in WWE history by returning to Raw and systematically destroying not just Seth Rollins but also Paul Heyman, his own wise man and most loyal advocate, in a display of violence so brutal and unexpected that it has completely shattered the bloodline and left the entire wrestling world questioning everything we thought we knew about the tribal chief. What we witnessed wasn't just a surprise return, it was the calculated annihilation of everyone Roman perceives as having failed him during his absence, and the fact that he showed absolutely no mercy even to the man who has stood by his side for years proves the tribal chief has returned more dangerous and unhinged than ever before. The sight of Paul Heyman, Roman's closest confidant, his voice, his strategist for the past 4 years, lying motionless after being speared through a table by the very man he dedicated his career to serving will be remembered as one of the most heartbreaking and shocking moments in modern wrestling. This wasn't just unexpected, it was a complete destruction of the loyalist bonds that made the bloodline so powerful, revealing that Roman's paranoia and rage have consumed even his most sacred relationships. Roman just speared Paul Heyman. The tribal chief has lost his mind. The bloodline is destroyed. Those weren't just horrified words from devastated commentators, they were anguished declarations that the faction which dominated WWE for years had just been obliterated from within by its own leader in the most brutal family implosion ever witnessed. The absolute shock in their voices captured how unthinkable this betrayal truly was. You want to talk about returns that fundamentally destroy everything we believed about loyalty and family? Roman Reigns didn't just come back to reclaim his position, he returned with such vengeance and fury that he attacked the two people most responsible for either his success or his recent struggles, making absolutely no distinction between his greatest advocate and his greatest rival. The indiscriminate violence proves Roman has crossed into genuinely dangerous psychological territory. The setup for this explosive return was perfectly timed to create maximum chaos and destruction. Seth Rollins was in the middle of a celebration promo about thriving during Roman's absence when suddenly the arena went completely dark and that unmistakable Samoan chant filled the building, signaling the return of the tribal chief in the most ominous way possible. But here's what makes this return absolutely terrifying and different from typical comebacks. Roman didn't emerge with his usual confidence and controlled intensity. He stormed down that ramp with unhinged rage in his eyes, and the way he moved suggested someone who had completely abandoned the calculated approach that defined his tribal chief character in favor of pure destructive fury. The most shocking aspect of this attack was how Roman completely ignored the traditional wrestling confrontation structure and immediately launched into violence. There were no words, no posturing, no opportunity for Seth to defend himself or explain, just pure assault from a man who had clearly spent his time away obsessing over perceived betrayals and failures. Here's a question that's going to reveal just how unprecedented Roman's mental state has become. Did you notice how his facial expression showed absolutely no recognition of anything except rage, suggesting he might have suffered some kind of psychological break during his absence? The actual destruction of Seth Rollins was brutal and one-sided in ways we've never seen from Roman before. Multiple Superman punches followed by a devastating spear that folded Seth completely in half. But instead of stopping there like he normally would, Roman picked Seth up and delivered another spear, then another, as if he was trying to permanently end Seth's career rather than just defeat him. But the most devastating and genuinely shocking moment came after Roman had already destroyed Seth and was standing over his unconscious body when Paul Heyman rushed to the ring. Everyone watching assumed the wise man was coming to either celebrate Roman's return or calm his rage, but what happened next will haunt wrestling fans forever. Paul Heyman slid into the ring with his arms open for an embrace, tears of joy streaming down his face at seeing his tribal chief return, when suddenly Roman's expression transformed into something dark and accusatory. "Where were you when I needed you most?" Roman's words were barely audible, but the cameras caught them, and the confusion and terror that immediately appeared on Heyman's face made everyone realize something terrible was about to happen. Quick question for the relationship dynamics experts: what does it say about Roman's psychological state that he would attack the one person who has been completely loyal to him throughout his entire tribal chief run? The most heartbreaking sequence came when Paul Heyman tried desperately to explain and defend himself. "My tribal chief, I have always been loyal to you. Everything I've done has been for you and the bloodline." But Roman wasn't listening. His paranoia and rage had apparently convinced him that Heyman had somehow failed or betrayed him during his absence, and no words could penetrate that delusion. The investigation into what triggered Roman's attack on Heyman reveals he apparently believes Paul was working with Seth or others during his absence to undermine his position. Sources suggest Roman has become convinced that everyone has been plotting against him, creating a paranoid mindset where even his most loyal advocate is viewed as a potential traitor. But perhaps the most shocking and disturbing moment was when Roman actually grabbed Paul Heyman, the 58-year-old non-wrestler who has been his voice and strategist, and set him up for a spear through the announce table. The crowd was screaming for him to stop, Seth was unconscious and couldn't intervene, and Heyman was begging for mercy, but Roman's face showed absolutely zero hesitation or remorse. The spear that drove Paul Heyman through the table was delivered with the same force Roman would use on a wrestler, showing no consideration for Heyman's age or non-combatant status. The way Heyman's body crashed through the wood and crumpled in the wreckage was genuinely disturbing and crossed every line between wrestling violence and assault on a defenseless person. Here's another question for the ethical boundaries experts: should there be different standards for violence against non-wrestler personalities like managers, and did Roman cross an unforgivable line by attacking Paul Heyman with full force? The most infuriating aspect of this entire situation is that Roman showed absolutely no remorse after destroying both men. He stood in the wreckage of the announce table with Paul Heyman's unconscious body at his feet and Seth Rollins broken in the ring, and his expression showed nothing but cold satisfaction. This wasn't the conflicted tribal chief, this was a man who had completely lost his moral compass. The testimonies from wrestlers watching backstage reveal absolute horror and disbelief at what they had witnessed. Nobody could believe Roman would actually attack Paul, one shocked performer revealed. Heyman has been more loyal to Roman than anyone, and watching him get destroyed like that made everyone realize Roman has become genuinely dangerous to everyone around him. But the most disturbing revelation came from medical personnel who treated both victims after the attack. Paul Heyman reportedly suffered severe injuries including possible broken ribs and a concussion from going through the table, while Seth's condition was equally concerning with multiple documented injuries from the repeated spears. Roman didn't just attack them, he tried to permanently injure both men. The medical response was immediate, but the emotional trauma may be worse than the physical injuries. Paul Heyman was reportedly asking why repeatedly while being treated, unable to comprehend why the man he dedicated years of his life to serving would turn on him so viciously. The psychological devastation of the betrayal may never fully heal. The fan reaction to Roman's attack on Paul Heyman has been absolutely divided and explosive. While some fans are praising the shocking storytelling, others are expressing genuine anger that WWE would have Roman attack a beloved non-wrestler personality with such brutality. The controversy has generated massive engagement but also legitimate criticism. Here's a question about fan comfort levels: does Roman attacking Paul Heyman create compelling television, or does it cross boundaries that make wrestling too uncomfortable to enjoy? The most controversial aspect of this storyline is what it does to the Bloodline's entire legacy. Years of storytelling about family loyalty and Samoan pride have been completely destroyed by Roman's paranoid rampage against his own people. The faction that dominated WWE through unity has been obliterated by its leader's inability to trust even his most loyal supporters. The investigation into what this means for other Bloodline members reveals that Solo Sikoa, Jimmy USO, and GUSO are all reportedly reconsidering their allegiance to Roman. When the tribal chief attacks Paul Heyman without cause, it sends a clear message that nobody is safe from his paranoia, making continued loyalty potentially dangerous. But perhaps the most important question is whether Roman can ever recover from this psychologically, or if he has permanently crossed into villain territory with no path to redemption. Attacking Seth is one thing, but destroying Paul Heyman, the ultimate loyal servant, suggests Roman has become the very tyrant that the Bloodline originally opposed. The testimonies from Paul Heyman's friends and colleagues in WWE reveal genuine anger at Roman for what he's done. Multiple wrestlers have reportedly confronted Roman backstage demanding to know why he would attack someone who never betrayed him, but Roman apparently refuses to engage or explain his reasoning. The most shocking theory is that Roman's attack on Heyman might not have been about betrayal at all, it might have been about eliminating witnesses to his failures. If Roman has become so consumed by maintaining his image of dominance that he'll destroy anyone who saw him vulnerable during his absence, that reveals truly sociopathic thinking. Here's a psychological question for the experts: what kind of mental state leads someone to attack their most loyal ally simply because that person witnessed moments of weakness or failure? The comparison to other faction implosions throughout wrestling history is inevitable, but the Bloodline's destruction might be the most shocking because it came from within rather than external pressure. The Shield broke up through betrayal between equals, Evolution fell apart through rebellion, but the Bloodline is being destroyed by its own leader's paranoid rage. The most terrifying implication is that Roman may continue this purge by attacking other Bloodline members. If he views Paul Heyman as having failed him, what does he think about Solo Sikoa's performance during his absence? What about the Usos? This could be just the beginning of Roman systematically destroying everyone he perceives as having let him down. But perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect is what this does to Paul Heyman's character and legacy. He spent years building Roman into the tribal chief, sacrificing his own spotlight to serve Roman's vision, and his reward was being speared through a table and cast aside like garbage. The injustice and cruelty of that betrayal is genuinely painful to witness. The investigation into whether Paul Heyman will continue with WWE after this attack reveals uncertainty. Sources suggest he's devastated both physically and emotionally, and the betrayal by someone he viewed as family may have broken something fundamental in his relationship with the business. Here's a question about loyalty and its limits: after being betrayed this brutally by someone you served faithfully, is it even possible to continue in the same organization, or has Roman destroyed Heyman's passion for WWE entirely? The most important consideration is how WWE rebuilds after this destruction. The Bloodline was their most successful faction in years, Roman was their top star, and Paul Heyman was an irreplaceable voice. By having Roman destroy both his faction and his advocate in one night, WWE has created chaos that will take months or years to resolve. The testimonies from WWE creative team members reveal they're scrambling to figure out where this storyline goes next. Nobody expected Roman to attack Heyman, one writer admitted. Now we have to figure out if Roman becomes a complete monster everyone opposes, or if there's some way to eventually explain and redeem his actions. But the most shocking development is that Roman has reportedly refused to explain his reasoning to anyone backstage. He's been completely silent about why he attacked both Seth and Paul, leaving everyone to speculate about his motivations and mental state. The mystery adds intrigue but also genuine concern. The coming weeks will reveal whether Roman Reigns can justify his actions and rebuild some form of bloodline, or whether he's permanently destroyed the faction through paranoid rage that turned him against his own most loyal supporters. Either way, WWE will never be the same after the Tribal Chief's shocking return and systematic destruction of everyone around him. Here's a final question for the entire WWE universe. After watching Roman Reigns destroy both Seth Rollins and Paul Heyman, do you view him as an unhinged villain who needs to be stopped, or as a strategic leader eliminating perceived weaknesses? The wrestling world is reeling from the most shocking faction implosion in history, and the Bloodline, the dominant force that defined WWE for years, has been completely destroyed from within by its own paranoid leader. Roman Reigns didn't just return, he returned as a monster who showed no mercy even to his most loyal advocate, proving that in his twisted mind, everyone has failed him and everyone must pay the price. The Tribal Chief has become the tyrant, and absolutely nobody is safe from his unhinged fury.